Indian nationalist leader Subhas Chandra Bose died from third-degree burns on August 18, 1945 after his overloaded Japanese plane crashed in Japanese-occupied Formosa, now Taiwan. However, many among his supporters, especially in Bengal, refused at the time, and have refused since, to believe either the fact or the circumstances of his death. Conspiracy theories appeared within hours of his death and have thereafter had a long shelf life, keeping alive various martial myths about Bose. Death. Last months with the Indian National Army. During the last week of April 1945, Subhas Chandra Bose along with his senior Indian National Army, INA, officers, several hundred enlisted INA men, and nearly 100 women from the INA's Rani of Jhansi Regiment left Rangoon by road for Moulmein in Burma. Accompanied by Lieutenant General Saburo E. Soda, the head of the Japanese INA liaison organization Hikari Kikan, their Japanese military convoy was able to reach the right bank of the Sitang River, albeit slowly. See Map 1. However, very few vehicles were able to cross the river because of American strafing runs. Bose and his party walked the remaining 80 miles, 130 kilometers, to Moulmein over the next week. Moulmein then was the terminus of the Death Railway, constructed earlier by British, Australian, and Dutch prisoners of war, linking Burma to Siam, now Thailand. At Moulmein, Bose's group was also joined by 500 men from the X-Regiment, INA's 1st Guerrilla Regiment, who arrived from a different location in Lower Burma. A year and a half earlier, 16,000 INA men and 100 women had entered Burma from Malaya. Now, less than one-tenth that number left the country, arriving in Bangkok during the first week of May. The remaining 9/10 were either killed in action, died from malnutrition or injuries after the battles of Impel and Kohima. Others were captured by the British, turned themselves in, or simply disappeared. Bose stayed in Bangkok for a month, where soon after his arrival he heard the news of Germany's surrender on May 8. Bose spent the next 2 months between June and July 1945 in Singapore, and in both places attempted to raise funds for billeting his soldiers or rehabilitating them if they chose to return to civilian life, which most of the women did. In his nightly radio broadcasts, Bose spoke with increasing virulence against Gandhi, who had been released from jail in 1944, and was engaged in talks with British administrators, envoys, and Muslim League leaders. Some senior INA officers began to feel frustrated or disillusioned with Bose and to prepare quietly for the arrival of the British and its consequences. During the first 2 weeks of August 1945, events began to unfold rapidly. With the British threatening to invade Malaya and with daily American aerial bombings, Bose's presence in Singapore became riskier by the day. His Chief of Staff J.R. Bhonsle suggested that he prepare to leave Singapore. On August 3, 1945, Bose received a cable from General E. Soda advising him to urgently evacuate to Saigon in Japanese-controlled French Indochina, now Vietnam. On August 10, Bose learned that the Soviet Union had entered the war and invaded Manchuria. At the same time he heard about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Finally, on August 16, after being informed of the unconditional surrender of Japan, Bose decided to leave for Saigon along with a handful of his aides. Last days and journeys. Reliable strands of historical narrative about Bose's last days are united up to this point. However, they separate briefly for the period between August 16, when Bose received news of Japan's surrender in Singapore, and shortly after noon on August 17, when Bose and his party arrived at Saigon Airport from Saigon City to board a plane. See Map 2. In one version, Bose flew out from Singapore to Saigon, stopping briefly in Bangkok, on the 16th. Soon after arriving in Saigon, he visited Field Marshal Hisayuki Terauchi, head of the Japanese forces in Southeast Asia, and requested him to arrange a flight to Soviet Russia. Although until the day before, Russia had been a belligerent of Japan, it was also seen, at least by Bose, as increasingly anti-British, and, consequently, a possible base of his future operations against the British Raj. Terauchi, in turn, cabled Japan's Imperial General Headquarters, IGHQ, in Tokyo for permission, which was quickly denied. In the words of historian Joyce Chapman Lebra, the IGHQ felt that it would be unfair of Bose to write off Japan and go over to Russia after receiving so much help from Japan. Terauchi added in talking with Bose that it would be unreasonable for him to take a step which was opposed by the Japanese. Privately, however, Terauchi still felt sympathy for Bose, one that had been formed during their 2-year-long association. He somehow managed to arrange room for Bose on a flight leaving Saigon on the morning of August 17, 1945, bound for Tokyo, but stopping en route in Dairen, Manchuria, which was still Japanese-occupied, but toward which the Soviet army was fast approaching, where Bose was to have disembarked and to have awaited his fate at the hand of the Russians. In another version, Bose left Singapore with his party on the 16th and stopped en route in Bangkok, surprising INA officer in charge there, J.R. Bhonsle, who quickly made arrangements for Bose's overnight stay. Word of Bose's arrival, however, got out, and soon local members of the Indian Independence League, IIL, the INA, and the Thai Indian business community turned up at the hotel. According to historian Peter Ward Fay, Bose sat up half the night holding court and in the morning flew on to Saigon, this time accompanied by General E. Soda. Arriving in Saigon, late in the morning, there was little time to visit Field Marshal Terauchi, who was in Dalat in the central highlands of French Indochina, an hour away by plane. Consequently, E. Soda himself, without consulting with higher-ups, arranged room for Bose on a flight leaving around noon. In the third sketchier version, Bose left Singapore on the 17th. According to historian Christopher Bailey and Tim Harper, on August 17 he issued a final order of the day, dissolving the INA with the words, "The roads to Delhi are many and Delhi still remains our goal." He then flew out to China via French Indochina. If all else failed, he wanted to become a prisoner of the Soviets. They are the only ones who will resist the British. My fate is with them. Around noon on August 17, the strands again reunite. At Saigon Airport, a Mitsubishi Ki-21 heavy bomber, of the type code named Sally by the Allies, was waiting for Bose and his party. In addition to Bose, the INA group comprised Colonel Habibur Rahman, his secretary, S.A. Air, a member of his cabinet, Major Abid Hassan, his old associate who had made the hazardous submarine journey from Germany to Sumatra in 1943, and 3 others. To their dismay, they learned upon arrival that there was room for only 1 INA passenger. Bose complained, and the beleaguered General E. Soda gave in and hurriedly arranged for a second seat. Bose chose Habibur Rahman to accompany him. It was understood that the others in the INA party would follow him on later flights. There was further delay at Saigon Airport. According to historian Joyce Chapman Lebra, a gift of treasure contributed by local Indians was presented to Bose as he was about to board the plane. The 2 heavy strong boxes added overweight to the plane's full load. Sometime between noon and 2 p.m., the twin-engine plane took off with 12 or 13 people aboard, a crew of 3 or 4, a group of Japanese Army and Air Force officers, including Lieutenant General Tsunamasa Shide, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Japanese Guangdong Army, which although fast retreating in Manchuria still held the Manchurian Peninsula, and Bose and Rahman. Bose was sitting a little to the rear of the port side wing. The bomber, under normal circumstances, carried a crew of 5. That these flights were possible a few days after Japan's surrender was the result of a lack of clarity about what had occurred. Although Japan had unconditionally surrendered, when Emperor Hirohito had made his announcement over the radio, he had used formal Japanese, not entirely intelligible to ordinary people and, instead of using the word surrender, in Japanese, had mentioned only abiding by the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. Consequently, many people, especially in Japanese-occupied territories, were unsure if anything had significantly changed, allowing a window of a few days for the Japanese Air Force to continue flying. Although the Japanese and Bose were tight-lipped about the destination of the bomber, it was widely assumed by Bose's staff left behind on the tarmac in Saigon that the plane was bound for Dairen on the Manchurian Peninsula, which, as stated above, was still under Japanese control. Bose had been talking for over a year about the importance of making contact with the Communists, both Russian and Chinese. In 1944, he had asked a minister in his cabinet, Anand Mohan Sahai, to travel to Tokyo for the purposes of making contact with the Soviet ambassador, Jacob Malik. However, after consulting the Japanese Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, Sahai decided against it. In May 1945, Sahai had again written to Shigemitsu requesting him to contact Soviet authorities on behalf of Bose. Again the reply had been in the negative. Bose had been continually querying General E. Soda for over a year about the Japanese Army's readiness in Manchuria. After the war, the Japanese confirmed to the British investigators and later Indian commissions of inquiry, that plane was indeed bound for Dairen, and that fellow passenger General Shidia of the Guangdong Army was to have disembarked with Bose in Dairen and to have served as the main liaison and negotiator for Bose's transfer into Soviet-controlled territory in Manchuria. The plane had flown north. By the time it was near the northern coast of French Indochina, darkness had begun to close in, and the pilot decided to make an unscheduled stop in Tu Rain, now Da Nang, Vietnam. The passengers stayed overnight at a hotel, and the crew, worried that the plane was overloaded, shed some 500 pounds of equipment and luggage, and also refueled the plane. Before dawn the next morning, the group flew out again, this time east to Tohoku, Formosa, now Taipei, Taiwan, which was a scheduled stop, arriving there around noon on August 18, 1945. During the 2-hour stop in Tohoku, the plane was again refueled, while the passengers ate lunch. The chief pilot and the ground engineer, and Major Kono, seemed concerned about the port-side engine, and, once all the passengers were on board, the engine was tested by repeatedly throttling up and down. The concerns allayed, the plane finally took off, in different accounts, as early as 2 p.m., and as late as 2:30 p.m., watched by ground engineers. Death in plane crash. Just as the bomber was leaving the standard path taken by aircraft during takeoff, the passengers inside heard a loud sound, similar to an engine backfiring. The mechanics on the tarmac saw something fall out of the plane. It was the port-side engine, or a part of it, and the propeller. The plane swung wildly to the right and plummeted, crashing, breaking into two, and exploding into flames. Inside, the chief pilot, co-pilot, and General Shidia were instantly killed. Raman was stunned, passing out briefly, and Bose, although conscious and not fatally hurt, was soaked in gasoline. When Raman came to, he and Bose attempted to leave by the rear door but found it blocked by the luggage. They then decided to run through the flames and exit from the front. The ground staff, now approaching the plane, saw two people staggering towards them, one of whom had become a human torch. The human torch turned out to be Bose, whose gasoline-soaked clothes had instantly ignited. Raman and a few others managed to smother the flames, but also noticed that Bose's face and head appeared badly burned. According to Joyce Chapman Lebra, a truck which served as ambulance rushed Bose and the other passengers to the Nanman Military Hospital south of Tohoku. The airport personnel called Dr. Tanioji Yoshimi, the surgeon in charge at the hospital. At around 3 p.m. Bose was conscious and mostly coherent when they reached the hospital, and for some time thereafter. Bose was naked, except for a blanket wrapped around him, and Dr. Yoshimi immediately saw evidence of third-degree burns on many parts of the body, especially on his chest, doubting very much that he would live. Dr. Yoshimi promptly began to treat Bose and was assisted by Dr. Tsuruta. According to historian Leonard A. Gordon, who interviewed all the hospital personnel later, a disinfectant, Rivamol, was put over most of his body and then a white ointment was applied and he was bandaged over most of his body. Dr. Yoshimi gave Bose 4 injections of Vita camphor and 2 of digitamine for his weakened heart. These were given about every 30 minutes. Since his body had lost fluids quickly upon being burnt, he was given Ringer solution intravenously. A third doctor, Dr. Ishii, gave him a blood transfusion. An orderly, Kazuo Mitsui, an army private, was in the room and several nurses were assisting. Bose still had a clear head, which Dr. Yoshimi found remarkable for someone with such severe injuries. Soon, in spite of the treatment, Bose went into a coma. He died a few hours later, between 9 and 10 p.m. Bose's body was cremated in the main Teihoko crematorium 2 days later, August 20, 1945. On August 23, 1945, the Japanese news agency Domei announced the death of Bose and Shidia. On September 7, the Japanese officer, Lieutenant Tatsuo Hayashida, carried Bose's ashes to Tokyo, and the following morning they were handed to the president of the Tokyo Indian Independence League, Rama Murthy. On September 14 a memorial service was held for Bose in Tokyo, and a few days later the ashes were turned over to the priest of the Renki temple of Nichiren Buddhism in Tokyo. There they have remained ever since. Among the INA personnel, there was widespread disbelief, shock, and trauma. Most affected were the young Tamil Indians from Malaya and Singapore, men and women, who comprised the bulk of the civilians who had enlisted in the INA. The professional soldiers in the INA, most of whom were Punjabis, faced an uncertain future, with many fatalistically expecting reprisals from the British. In India, the Indian National Congress's official line was succinctly expressed in a letter Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi wrote to Rajkumari Amritkar. Said Gandhi, Subhas Bose has died well. He was undoubtedly a patriot, though misguided. Many congressmen had not forgiven Bose for quarreling with Gandhi and for collaborating with what they considered was Japanese fascism. The Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army, some 2.5 million of whom had fought during the Second World War, were conflicted about the INA. Some saw the INA as traitors and wanted them punished, others felt more sympathetic. The British Raj, though never seriously threatened by the INA, was to try 300 INA officers for treason in the INA trials, but was to eventually backtrack in the face of its own end. Legends of Bose's survival. Immediate post-war legends. Subhas Chandra Bose's exploits had become legendary long before his physical death in August 1945. From the time he had escaped house arrest in Calcutta in 1940, rumours had been rife in India about whether or not he was alive, and if the latter, where he was and what he was doing. His appearance in faraway Germany in 1941 created a sense of mystery about his activities. With Congress leaders in jail in the wake of the Quit India resolution in August 1942 and the Indian public starved for political news, Bose's radio broadcasts from Berlin charting radical plans for India's liberation during a time when the star of Germany was still rising and that of Britain was at its lowest, made him an object of adulation among many in India and Southeast Asia. During his 2 years in Germany, according to historian Romain Hayes, if Bose gradually obtained respect in Berlin, in Tokyo he earned fervent admiration and was seen very much as an Indian samurai. Thus it was that when Bose appeared in Southeast Asia in July 1943, brought mysteriously on German and Japanese submarines, he was already a figure of mythical size and reach. After Bose's death, Bose's other lieutenants, who were to have accompanied him to Manchuria, but were left behind on the tarmac in Saigon, never saw a body. There were no photographs taken of the injured or deceased Bose, neither was a death certificate issued. According to historian Leonard A. Gordon, the war was ending, all was chaotic in East Asia, and there were no official reports released by the governments of India or Britain. These governments did nothing to prevent the confusion. Even members of India's interim government in 1946 waffled on the matter. Bose had disappeared several times earlier in his life, so rumors began again in 1945 and a powerful myth grew. For these two reasons, when news of Bose's death was reported, many in the INA refused to believe it and were able to transmit their disbelief to a wider public. The source of the widespread skepticism in the INA might have been Bose's senior officer J.R. Bhonsle. Bhonsle, unlike some other senior officers, had been kept in the dark about Bose's final plans, in part because he had also become an agent for the British. When a Japanese delegation, which included General E. Soda, visited Bhonsle on August 19, 1945 to break the news and offer condolences, he responded by telling E. Soda that Bose had not died, rather his disappearance has been covered up. Even Mohandas Gandhi swiftly said that he was skeptical about the air crash, but changed his mind after meeting the Indian survivor Habibur Rahman. As in 1940, before long, in 1945, rumors were rife about what had happened to Bose, whether he was in Soviet-held Manchuria, a prisoner of the Soviet Army, or whether he had gone into hiding with the cooperation of the Soviet Army. Lakshmi Swaminathan, of the all-female Rani of Jhansi Regiment of the INA, later Lakshmi Sahgal, said in spring 1946 that she thought Bose was in China. Many rumors spoke of Bose preparing for his final march on Delhi. This was the time when Bose began to be cited by people, one citer claiming he had met Bose in a third-class compartment of the Bombay Express on a Thursday. Enduring legends. In the 1950s, stories appeared in which Bose had become a sadhu, or Hindu renunciant. The best known and most intricate of the renunciant tales of Subhas Bose, and one which, according to historian Leonard A. Gordon, may properly be called a myth, was told in the early 1960s. Some associates of Bose, from 2 decades before, had formed an organization, the Subhaspati Janata, to promote this story in which Bose was now the chief sadhu of an ashram, or hermitage, in Shalmari, also Sholmari, in North Bengal. The Janata brought out published material, including several newspapers and magazines. Of these, some were long-lived and some short, but all, by their number, attempted to create the illusion of the story's newsworthiness. The chief sadhu himself vigorously denied being Bose. Several intimates of Bose, including some politicians, who met with the sadhu, supported the denials. Even so, the Subhaspati Janata was able to create an elaborate chronology of Bose's post-war activities. According to this chronology, after his return to India, Bose returned to the vocation of his youth. He became a Hindu renunciant. He attended Unseen Gandhi's cremation in Delhi in early February 1948, walked across and around India several times, became a yogi at a Shiva temple in Bareilly in north-central India from 1956 to 1959, became a practitioner of herbal medicine and effected several cures, including one of tuberculosis, and established the Shalmari ashram in 1959, taking the religious name Srimatsaradhanandaji. Bose, moreover, was engaged in tapasya, or meditation, to free the world, his goals having been broadened, after his first goal freeing India was achieved. His attempt to do so, however, and to assume his true identity, was being thwarted jointly by political parties, newspapers, the Indian government, even foreign governments. Other stories appeared, spun by the Janata and by others. Bose was still in the Soviet Union or the People's Republic of China, attended the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's cremation in 1964, but, this time, neglecting to disallow a Janata-published newspaper to photograph him, and gave notice to the Janta of his return to Calcutta, for which several much publicized rallies were organized. Bose did not appear. The Janata eventually broke up, its reputation marred by successive non-appearances of its protagonist. The real Sadhu of Shalmari, who continued to deny he was Bose, died in 1977. It was also claimed that Nikita Khrushchev had reportedly told an interpreter during his New Delhi visit that Bose can be produced within 45 days if Nehru wishes. Still other stories or hoaxes elucidated with conspiracies and accompanied with fake photographs of the now aging Bose being in the Soviet Union or China had traction well into the early 80s. Bose was seen in a photograph taken in Beijing, inexplicably parading with the Chinese Red Army. Bose was said to be in a Soviet gulag. The Soviet leadership was said to be blackmailing Nehru, and later, Indira Gandhi, with the threat of releasing Bose. An Indian member of parliament, Samar Guha, released in 1979 what he claimed was a contemporaneous photograph of Bose. This turned out to have been doctored, comprising one half Bose and one half his elder brother Sarat Chandra Bose. Guha also charged Nehru with having had knowledge of Bose's incarceration in the Soviet Union even in the 1950s, a charge Guha recanted after he was sued. For the remainder of the century and into the next, the renunciant legends continued to appear. Most prominently, a retired judge, who had been appointed by the Indian government in 1999 to undertake an inquiry into Bose's death, brought public notice to another sannyasi or renunciant, Gumnami Baba, also known by his religious name, Bhagwanji, who was said to have lived in the town of Faizabad in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. According to historian Shugata Bose, in October 2002, he, the judge, sent letters to members of the Bose family asking them to donate 1 milliliter of blood for a DNA match with one Gumnami Baba, who some persons had claimed was none other than Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. The evidence naturally did not support this bizarre theory. Earlier, in 1977, summing up the extant Bose legends, historian Joyce Chapman Lebra had written, "Stories persist that Netaji has become a sannyasi, holy man, and has been seen in the Naga Hill country of Assam, that he was a member of a Mongolian trade delegation in Peking, that he lives in Russia, that he is in the Chinese army. Pictures have been produced to prove that Netaji is still alive. Bose's family have announced at times that he is in hiding and will return to India when the time is right." In February 1966, Suresh Chandra Bose announced in the press that his brother would return in March. To date, however, Bose has not reappeared to contradict the evidence that he died in the crash on Taiwan. But the myth lives on. Perspectives on durability of legends. According to historians Christopher Bailey and Tim Harper, the legend of Netaji Bose's survival helped bind together the defeated Aina. In Bengal it became an assurance of the province's supreme importance in the liberation of the motherland. It sustained the morale of many across India and Southeast Asia who deplored the return of British power or felt alienated from the political settlement finally achieved by Gandhi and Nehru. Amid all this, Joyce Chapman Lebra wrote in 2008, "The Japanese have always wished to return the ashes to Bengal, as they believe that a soul will not rest in peace until the ashes are brought home. The prospect of having Netaji's ashes in Bengal, however, has been known to incite rioting, as happened one year at the annual January 23 convention at the Netaji Research Bureau in Calcutta. Hot-headed young Bengali radicals broke into the convention hall where Fujiwara, the founder of the Aina, was to address the assemblage and shouted abuse at him. Apparently some newspaper had published a rumor that Fujiwara had brought Netaji's ashes back. Inquiries. Fig.S. Report 1946. Confronted with rumors about Bose, which had begun to spread within days of his death, the Supreme Allied Command, Southeast Asia, under Mountbatten, tasked Colonel, later Sir, John Fig.S., an intelligence officer, with investigating Bose's death. Fig.S.'s report, submitted on July 25, 1946, however, was confidential, being work done in Indian Political Intelligence, IPI, a partially secret branch of the Government of India. Fig.S. was interviewed in the 1980s by historian Leonard A. Gordon and confirmed writing the report. In 1997, the British government made most of the IPI files available for public viewing in the India Office records of the British Library. However, the Fig.S. report was not among them. A photocopy of the Fig.S. report was soon anonymously donated for public viewing to the British Library in the European Manuscripts Collection, as EUR Manuscripts C 785. Good candidates for the donor, according to historian Leonard Gordon, are Fig.S. himself, who had died in 1997, or more likely another British intelligence officer in wartime India, Hugh Toy, the author of the book, Toy, Hugh, 1959, The Springing Tiger, A Study of the Indian National Army and of Netaji. Subhas Chandra Bose, Bombay, Allied Publishers, ISBN 978-81-8424-392-5. The crucial paragraph in the Fig.S. report, by Colonel John Fig.S., Indian Political Intelligence, July 25, 1946, is: as a result of a series of interrogations of individuals named in the following paragraphs, it is confirmed as certain that S.C. Bose died in a Tehoku military hospital, Naman Ward, sometime between 1700 hours and 2000 hours local time on the August 18, 1945. The cause of death was heart failure resulting from multiple burns and shock. All the persons named below were interrogated at different times, but the several accounts of the event agree both in substance and detail at all points where the knowledge of the subjects could have been deemed to be based on common experience. The possibility of a prearranged fabrication must be excluded, since most of the individuals concerned had no opportunity of contact with one another prior to interrogation. The remaining 4 pages of the Fig.S. report contain interviews with 2 survivors of the plane crash, Lieutenant Colonels Nanagaki and Sakai, with Dr. Yoshimi, who treated Bose in the hospital, and with others involved in post-death arrangements. In 1979, Leonard Gordon himself interviewed Lieutenant Colonels Nanagaki and Sakai, and, in addition, plane crash survivor, Major Kono, Dr. Yoshimi, the Japanese orderly who sat in the room through these treatments, and the Japanese officer, Lieutenant Hayashida, who carried Bose's ashes from the crematorium in Taipei to Japan. The Fig.S. report and Leonard Gordon's investigations confirm 4 facts. The crash near Tehoku Airport on August 18, 1945 of a plane on which Subhas Chandra Bose was a passenger. Bose's death in the nearby military hospital on the same day. Bose's cremation in Tehoku, and transfer of Bose's ashes to Tokyo. Shahnawaz Committee 1956. With the goal of quelling the rumors about what happened to Subhas Chandra Bose after mid-August 1945, the Government of India in 1956 appointed a 3-man committee headed by Shahnawaz Khan. Khan was at the time a member of Parliament as well as a former lieutenant colonel in the Indian National Army and the best-known defendant in the INA trials of a decade before. The other members of the committee were S.N. Matra, ICS, who was nominated by the government of West Bengal, and Suresh Chandra Bose, an elder brother of Bose. The committee is referred to as the Shahnawaz Committee or the Netaji Inquiry Committee. From April to July 1956, the committee interviewed 67 witnesses in India, Japan, Thailand, and Vietnam. In particular, the committee interviewed all the survivors of the plane crash, some of whom had scars on their bodies from burns. The committee interviewed Dr. Yoshimi, the surgeon at the Tohoku military hospital who treated Bose in his last hours. It also interviewed Bose's Indian companion on the flight, Habibur Rahman, who, after the partition, had moved to Pakistan and had burn scars from the plane crash. Although there were minor discrepancies here and there in the evidence, the first two members of the committee, Khan and Matra, concluded that Bose had died in the plane crash in Tohoku on August 18, 1945. Bose's brother, Subhas Chandra Bose, however, after having signed off on the initial conclusions, declined to sign the final report. He, moreover, wrote a dissenting note in which he claimed that the other members and staff of the Shahnawaz Committee had deliberately withheld some crucial evidence from him, that the committee had been directed by Jawaharlal Nehru to infer death by plane crash, and that the other committee members, along with Bengal's Chief Minister B.C. Roy, had pressured him bluntly to sign the conclusions of their final report. According to historian Leon.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.